All right, for a prediction video, been watching some of the last couple fights of each Shakur Stevenson and Teofimo Lopez, and I'm noticing, some things between their last few fights with Teofimo Lopez versus Lomachenko and Shakur Stevenson versus the last like 2-3 guys that he fought. One of them being Jamel Herring and what was the other guy? And I feel like he seems to, be able to get stationary, and he's got great skills to be able to do that, but he does seem to like to go to the ropes and then just chill there and try and pick the guy apart, for making bad mistakes while they're throwing wide punches, and he's up against the ropes seeming, like very relaxed. He's not wasting energy. These are definitely quality things, but is that going to be a good idea against Teofimo Lopez? I don't think so. And I think that if he stays up against the ropes, it's going to be a problem. What I'm basing that on is that when you look at Teofimo versus Lomachenko, of course, before that fight happened, a lot of people were like, is the offensive ability of Teofimo going to be good enough to be hitting Lomachenko? Because, of course, very few people are hitting Lomachenko anyway, right? When Teofimo was throwing, combinations at Lomachenko was not stationary. He was constantly in the middle of combinations, circling and making him miss often the first or second punch. But to Teofimo's credit, his punch placement skills were that his third and fourth were often landing. Very hard body shots, 1-2 to the top and then 1-2 to the bottom. And they were getting right under the elbow onto Lomachenko. And, he was landing some good punches. In my mind, when I compare the defensive responsibility and the defensive consistency of Lomachenko, at least in that fight against Teofimo Lopez, that Teofimo was still able to just land very large punches, hard punches on a person who's very difficult to hit. So now this comes down to, is Shakur Stevenson harder to hit than Lomachenko? I don't feel confidently about in either direction. So I would say they're pretty similar, but I'm sort of focusing on the fact that it looks like Shakur seems to be comfortable to just hang out, waste some time, maybe catch his breath. I don't know why he's doing that. Sometimes it's a good idea, and maybe I'm completely wrong and he just won't do that against Teofimo. But I think if he does, he'll get hit. I think that they're pretty close in their IQ and skill level. That I don't really feel confidently that there's going to be some kind of knockout. I don't think that Teofimo is going to just like beat the mess out of Shakur, but I think he's going to be able to land better punches than Shakur Stevenson. And I think that if he's less constantly moving and less, just less mobile than previous opponents of Teofimo that he was still able to hit quite clean, then I think he's also going to get hit clean. Typically, I'm a big proponent of, if someone comes up from a lower weight class, I feel like everyone focuses on size and power, and that matters. But at these little tiny differences, I think it's often usually just the person who comes from a lower class to the higher that's faster, sharper, sees the other person's punches and what they're planning just that quarter second, eighth of a second before they do, or before it lands. So they wind up having advantages, in my opinion, the smaller fighter. But in this case, looks like, even for his weight class, Teofimo has a very fast and speedy decision making in his offense and defensive responsibility. It's not like he's like super easy to get hit. Maybe he's a bit easier to get hit than Lomachenko or Shakur Stevenson, but it seems like he's responsible, he brings his hands back, all that stuff. Like, he's not just like an easy target to beat up on. He'll take that step back, he'll avoid, big punches, but in the middle of exchanges, something that I'm impressed by is his adaptation to land power in the middle of throwing a 4-punch combination. As you're throwing a 4-punch combination, first you got to throw one, then you got to throw two. And then in those tiny little, eighths of a second, you're thinking about what 3 and 4 is going to be. And it seems like he's quite good at that, Teofimo. And that he was able to catch, Loma ducks under 1, blocks 2, and then 3, 4 catch him. So he was fast enough, Teofimo is fast enough, locate where punches should be placed on someone like Lomachenko, who's got incredible defense. And even if you argue that Shakur Stevenson has better defense than Lomachenko, I think that wouldn't stretch that far to the point that maybe he has the capabilities to have better defensive in a given moment, but was he constantly as mobile and dancing basically as Lomachenko? That's a tough target to hit, even if he didn't have good defense. Just the fact that he moves that much, you're going to wind up missing punches. And Teofimo was landing those punches, the important ones, good ones too, not just like touching. Then on the contrary, while I don't have a strong opinion about which of them has better defense, Shakur or Lomachenko, for example, I'm sure he probably has better defense than you could give him the edge on defense against Teofimo, but I don't think that's going to matter that much, and here's why. I don't think Shakur Stevenson quite has the same accuracy and punch placement that I was just talking about Teofimo having. I think that he, when he was fighting one of the last guys, I think it was Jamel Herring, you could just see him like attempting offense and missing like a good amount of punches. A couple of them were just badly placed, in my opinion. It wasn't so much Jamel like blocking or slipping under, or getting out of the way or even countering them. He was just sort of like not in the right position. And Shakur decided, oh, this is a great time to throw the 1-2 or the 1-2-3, and it like all 3 missed, and Jamel was just like a step away. And it's like, okay, so I'm not in my mind's eye, in my AI calculator of like how this fight's going to go down, I can see Shakur Stevenson not being able to hit Teofimo very easily. But, even though it's not necessarily because Teofimo is so defensive, but that elite accuracy isn't quite there, where on the other hand, I think Teofimo's elite accuracy is definitely there. He's very fast. So I don't think coming up from, 135 is going to be that huge advantage in defense for Shakur. I wouldn't be too surprised if that happened because, he is coming up from a lower weight, and maybe I'm missing something on video that Teofimo's not 135 fast, but I don't think so. I think he's going to be able to land his punches. Over the course of the fight, I figure Teofimo's going to land better punches, and I think he'll come out with the win on a pretty good, solid, he punched Shakur more than Shakur punched him. I don't really think that there's going to be necessarily a knockout. It seems to me like Teofimo has quality power, but not this good night power, but it's more, it lasts into the 12th round. So any kind of hesitance that the other fighter has, because he's bam, jab, his jab's so aggressive. I feel like that landed a couple times against Lomachenko, and I was like, wow. I remember watching that fight live, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess there's going to be another Lomachenko just kind of dances around and embarrasses the guy, and it's bam, jab right to the face, bam, jab, stiff jab in the 10th round, in the 11th round. He keeps that power endurance. So I think that that's probably what's going to happen with Shakur Stevenson. He's probably not going to knock him out or anything, but he's going to be landing hard punches that are definitive, if that's the right word, even later into the fight. Whereas when you see Shakur Stevenson, he doesn't seem that explosive in the 11th round all the time. More like flurries that I think are not going to affect Teofimo as much. Another thing to note would be, is Teofimo Lopez going to struggle because Shakur is a southpaw? And, that definitely can throw a wrench into any kind of thinking oh, well, such and such is better than the other or faster than the other. But then once they're dealing with a southpaw, it's they're going to perform with a lot less quality. And that happens. That sometimes happens. And sometimes it's just that 5% difference that can really show over the course of a 12-round fight in these high-level fights where you wouldn't say that such and such fighter is bad at fighting southpaws, but there's just a little edge. They have that experience edge, and it shows. But again, I'm going to have to lean with Teofimo here. It seems like he's beaten Lomachenko and Josh Taylor, both quality southpaws, and it didn't seem like he had any kind of less quality of performance where you could see him kind of I was in the wrong position because it was a southpaw, or I missed this punch, or I got hit with this punch because he was a southpaw. It seems like he manages himself quite well against southpaws. So the next thing would also be their height and reach, and is there a real size advantage? I don't think it's too big. I'm really impressed with both of them, honestly, for their whole careers, because they both are not very gifted with tremendous reach in ratio to their heights. Teofimo Lopez, they're both pretty easy to remember because they're exactly the same. 5'8.5" tall with 5'8.5" reach, so not impressive at all for Teofimo. And then Shakur Stevenson, just a half-inch smaller, 5'8", if not 5'7.5", with 5'8" reach. So technically, Teofimo also has the advantage here. It's that much. Sometimes that's enough for someone like Teofimo to be on the outside and land that jab. But I wouldn't lean on that too much as an advantage, because something that he did against Lomachenko, was being able to sort of dominate that outside jab and sort of set things up with a very stiff, heavy jab that, like I said, held power throughout the fight. But Lomachenko's even smaller, much smaller than Shakur Stevenson from a height and reach perspective. He's 5'6", I think, or 5'7", and he has 5'5" reach. Really impressed when I was researching that and recognizing that Lomachenko's got some really short reach, because I complained about mine, and mine is an inch shorter than my height. I'm 6'2", and it's 6'1", and that sucks. But man, he's got 2 inches less, Lomachenko. That is wild that he's such a successful outside fighter. So yeah, back to Shakur, I think he's just got a half-inch less reach and a half-inch less height. Maybe that will help Teofimo with his outside jab and setting things up and sort of dictating the pace of the fight, but that's not a huge reason I think he's going to win, but it's that little 1% that might make a big difference. If there was anything that was going to make a big difference, it would be Shakur being southpaw and that messing up Teofimo, but I don't see that at all. I think we have a southpaw expert over here in Teofimo. And then with the slap incident, I don't know, I feel like I've heard people say oh yeah, that shows that, he's immature and that's going to mess up his ability to perform, at such an elite level. And I don't see that either. I feel take a look at Mayweather, right? Love him or hate him, he's on an extremely elite level, very difficult to hit, lands all his punches quite well, winning very definitively in pretty much every fight. In very beautiful showman fashion. So Mayweather did a lot of really dumb stuff, right? Just acting kind of like an idiot, the insults and cursing and, pushing people around, just not, and I'm not saying this to hate at all. He sold fights. So I say this out of respect as much as it can be, but Mayweather did really dumb stuff. And no one said, oh, that means he doesn't have the mind to manage these great fights. Clearly Mayweather has the mind to manage this, even though he's not always the most sophisticated individual at all times. So I don't think that that's going to play effect at all. Well, we only got a couple hours for the fight. I wish I did a little more homework on some of these undercards, but I'm excited to watch it. I'm a lazy fan. I will probably watch it tomorrow, but I wanted to get the video up before the fight. So if I'm right, and I'm right for the reasons I said, not just some other random reason, I don't think I get too much credit if they come out and Teofimo just like knocks him out in like a third left hook that's thrown, then I mean I guess that can happen. It's boxing, but I didn't foresee that, so I don't get credit for that if Teofimo wins like that fast. But if the fight plays out in the way that I'm saying, that I think, the southpaw's not going to bother him. He's going to be able to land cleaner punches than Shakur Stevenson more often than Shakur is. Then got to get this out before the fight so I can brag later. But yeah, that's how I see it going. I also see Shakur Stevenson landing his punches. Of course, they're a close level. I'm sure he's going to touch up Teofimo. We're going to see some marks on both, so I definitely see that happening. And the only way I can see it changing is if Shakur Stevenson moves a lot and decides to get on his bike and take the fight in a totally different direction. He doesn't try to like stay in the pocket, or not in the pocket, but stay within reasonable distance the way he typically has been in the last few fights. And then at that point, I'd throw my hands up. I'm not quite sure. Maybe I wouldn't even throw my hands up. I say if he does that, he might be able to flurry his way to a win, Shakur Stevenson. If he stays on his bike, doesn't engage, gets away from him, in and out movement. And if that happens, I would say I think Shakur could actually could win a decision. But that also slightly increases the chance of him getting timed into some kind of large punch from Teofimo, which would then amplify his power and maybe he'd get a knockout. But yep, that's where I'm at. All right. Enjoy the fights.